Okay, we're back. And we got all our possible size main bearings. Last time we verified that we had play in the crank. And one of the bearings is actually also a thrust washer, thrust bearing, whatever. So we have stock standard, 10 over, and I think 25 or 10 under, 25 under, or whatever all the options are. So we're gonna take the pan back off, drop a main cap, and see what we get. And what I'm hoping is that, it goes smoothly. But what we need to do is get those new bearings in to fix this issue. So let's get started. All right, so I pulled a cap off. I guess it's the one closest to the transmission. And you can see here, this is actually one of those thrust style bearings. And that side looks okay. And that side is deeply grooved and worn. That's the side that's been riding up against, oh boy, and the crankshaft is pretty severely worn here too. Right, that's the crank? Yeah. Yep, that's the crank there. It's got a deep groove in it. So that is not supposed to be worn. That's from driving for a while with low oil pressure. So unfortunately, even if we put a new bearing in it, it's just gonna rub on that one high spot. I mean, we'll see what the other, oh no, there's actually only one thrust washer. So that's probably not gonna do anything. Obviously we're here, we're gonna put these main bearings in it, but probably we'll expect this is not gonna last a very long time. Okay, so here's the not so good news. You see that lip in the back of the crankshaft? You can see up there where the main journal has just been eating into it, and there's one high spot on the end there. That one high spot is just gonna dig into our new bearing. And you can see how worn this bearing shell is. If you compare this side to that side, see how it's tapered at the top there? Well, I'll get the new one out so you can compare it, but unfortunately, because it has that one high spot, it's just gonna eat into the new bearing. So we got here, we're gonna do it, but I'm really pretty skeptical about how long this repair is gonna last. So this is gonna just kind of be an experiment. Maybe it'll go for a while, but chances are it will not. What I really wanted to say was, you can see there it is the undersize, the 0.25, and it's got a date code 0996. So probably in 97, this thing got the undersize main bearings put in it. That was probably the same time it had the undersize rod bearings. So you gotta wonder, what happened to this motor? It's really a mystery to me. Okay, so let's get another look at this. I already have the other bearing shell into the cap, but you can see here, this is what it's supposed to look like. And this is what it looks like. This has been just pounding the back of the motor. It's been pounding the main bearing journal, because once there's a little bit of play between the crankshaft, you gotta think this is fixed. This slightly moves back and forward, and there's probably some physics behind that. Well, I know for a fact there is. It might even be the right-hand rule, I'm not sure. But when you have rotation, you're also gonna have this axial movement, front and back movement. I I'm really talking like I know what I'm talking about. I don't really. I just know little bits and pieces, so bear with me here. I'm not trying to act like I know everything, but I do know a few things. Anyway, so that thrust washer essentially locates the crank in the center of this bearing cap, because obviously that thrust washer has that lip on it. That lip is going to ride on either side of this bearing cap, so that when you accelerate, it keeps the crankshaft more or less in the same position. It will actually have a small amount of play. We had low oil pressure for a while on this motor. That bearing probably overheated, and it just started to wear away. And the more it wears, the faster the wear occurs. That makes sense. So when there's a little bit of play, that crank can only gain so much momentum when it's going to slam into that main journal. When it has more play, it can gain a little bit more momentum, and then it's going to wear a little more. It wears a little more, now there's a little less material. Now there's more space. Now it can gain a little more momentum until you get to where we're at, where the flex plate's contacting the back of the engine block. So really this engine needs a new crankshaft. Because of just our constraints, we're just gonna try replacing all the main bearings. I don't anticipate that fix is going to last particularly long, but you never know. If you're not driving the car very hard, it could still work as a commuter. But that's the situation. I think I'm kind of losing my train of thought here, but this is a pretty interesting find. So you can see here in the cap, you have these reliefs cut out. And I wonder what the depth of that relief is, because obviously you have nothing left here. So you could estimate how much wear actually occurred, or you could also just get a caliper and measure it. And that's what we're gonna do. But even just with your eyeball, you can see it's much thinner there than there. Obviously, we know that. So that's what's going on. Unfortunately, that's what's happened to this engine. That's what low oil pressure will do. It had that low oil pressure light on for a while. So let's get it back together, and we're just going to cross our fingers and see what happens. We got the new bearing shell installed, and you can see what's going to happen. If you look and you see the gap between the bearing and the crank, the only area of contact is on that very, very edge. So once that material is gone, this whole shell is going to begin contacting the crank again, I believe. That's what it looks like to me right now. So I think the damage has just been done. When I move the crank, you can see I can move it back, and it stops against that front bearing. But if I do it the other way, well, it does stop, and the ring gear is not contacting the flywheel, but it's close. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, but there should not be a gap there. That should be touching, I believe. So not a great sign. All right, let's do this. Let's get the cap fully in, and let's just turn the engine over by hand and see, are we still contacting? Obviously there's some damage, but let's just see what it looks like as is. Okay, well that was promising. Turned the engine over twice with the caps, not fully torqued, but tight. And right now, I do have some play, but I'm gonna say that's nearly a normal amount. The ring gear is not contacting the engine block in its max position. One other thing I'm thinking, if my theory is correct, that it's just the outer edge of the bearing shell that was wearing, we would not have all this wear in the center. So the fact that we now have a bearing shell with more material here means whatever was wearing here will now have extra material. So we're just going to see what happens. I was even debating on whether it's worth it to do the rest of the main bearings, but we're here. We're going to replace them all. I'm going to complete this job correctly, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. You know, oftentimes when I'm making these videos, I'm kind of in a rush, and I miss little details. And later when I go back and review them, it seems pretty obvious. So maybe there's something I'm missing right now in my thinking on that wear and how it was wearing. But with the new bearing installed, it does seem to have a lot less play. Based on what I was seeing in there, I didn't actually think it would. I thought that the face of the crankshaft that bearing shell touches was completely worn away, meaning even with a new bearing, it was still going to have play, and it doesn't. That could be because it's still just only that outer lip that has a high spot, and that is possible. Based on the profile here, you can see that's the highest spot, meaning that's the only spot left with some material. But it's still possible that when there's more material here, it's going to push the edge of the bearing shell away from that high spot. In other words, it's going to take up some of the slack. So it's still not really necessarily a permanent repair, but it may be good enough. And this car has 150,000 miles on it, and this may take it for another 50K. Only time will tell. This is with the new shells in. Watch that gap there. That's all the way one way. That's all the way the other. All the way one way. All the way the other. So I think that amount of play is probably normal. It's just, is the bearing shell just riding on that one high spot in the crankshaft, and the moment it's worn through, are we going to be back to exactly where we were? The reason I think it might last a little longer is once it wears through that high spot, it's still got the rest of the shell, and the rest of the shell here was totally worn away. So it'll still have some of this material to sacrifice. So we'll see. Okay, got them all in. Didn't have too much trouble getting them in and out, but they've gotten progressively tighter as you move towards the front, which is interesting. And the crank journals look fine the whole time. They don't have any grooves. You know, nothing with the fingernail. But this last bearing shell I cannot get up and over the crank. We're going to put this in the freezer, let it get cold, take lunch, see if we can fit it in that way. And here's the wear on all the main bearings. Now this is kind of similar to what we saw with those rod bearings, where what we should see is sort of that matte gray surface, or in this case it's somewhat shiny, but usually on the rod, on the big end, well, this is not a connecting rod, usually on the lower half, it's got assembly lube on it now, but it's more that gray color. And we can see here, we wore through that coating on most of these bearings. Not much scratching, although some of them do have some scratches, but the crank felt completely smooth with the fingernail. So pretty impressive that this car was driven with literally almost no oil pressure. I think it was like 5 PSI at idle, maybe lower. Well, I mean, the low oil pressure light was on. I believe that comes down around 3 or 4 PSI. So pretty impressive. Obviously, there was some damage to that thrust washer. So we're going to get this in the freezer, take lunch, come back, get it back together. That didn't really work, freezing the bearing shell, that is. That bearing shell just does not really have enough mass to get cold. I mean, it got cold, and in 30 seconds, it's room temperature. I'm actually thinking what's going on now is the timing belt is probably pulling the crankshaft up ever so slightly. It just makes it a little tight. That's why those bearing shells are so hard to get out, and that's why now it's impossible to get in, because normally it would be pushing up on that bearing. So I'm going to try just taking the tension off the timing belt, see if that makes it easier. Okay, that worked. Got them all in, all torqued to 110 Newton meters. So we're going to get it back together, get the oil pump back on, pan back on, test drive it, and I have a feeling our problem is going to be solved. All right, that's it. Let's start her up. Helps to have the key. You know what? We're going to disable ignition. We're going to disable ignition, and we're going to disable fuel. We're just going to let it crank. Make sure we get solid oil pressure before we start running. Until the oil pressure light turns off. It's not turning off right now. It's got enough oil in it. So let the starter cool off for a moment or two. Oh wow. This thing probably needs a battery cable. Cable should not be hot that quickly. That's a problem for another day. Got oil in it. Oil pressure center is connected. Okay, let's try that again. Try to get that oil pressure light to shut off. Started to blink and turn off, so oil has circulated everywhere. Just want to make sure we don't have anything metal to metal, since we did just have everything apart. It'd be silly. Only takes a moment to prevent a little extra wear. Is that on? That's on. Okay, start it up for real. That was interesting. You heard that for the first few seconds. I don't know if that was piston slap or maybe just getting oil pressure into the main bearings or the rod bearings, but we did hear that little tapping for the first few seconds. Other than that, no drama. Very quiet motor, and 940s tend to be. Looks like we're still having a little bit of, I'm not sure if that's piston slap. It seems to not stick around. I'm going to let it just gently warm up for a few more minutes, and then I'm going to gently test drive it and just ease it into this process of breaking in. Anytime you put new bearings in, again, this is just sort of my theory, just go easy on it at first, because there is a chance there are some areas where the tolerances are a little different, a little out of spec, and maybe you'll have a little wear. So let's just give it a chance to any excess material just to wear off before we give it any boost at least. So I'll leave it for a few minutes. I'm not sure I got a before video of that horrible noise the transmission was making, but let's just take a little test drive here. Anytime we would get into load or get into boost, you would hear that terrible, terrible noise of the flex plate hitting the engine block, and obviously that's gone. So that's a job that's gone as well as it could have. Obviously, we found some damage in the motor we didn't anticipate. Something I've never seen before, something I think probably most people have not seen before. It is curious that this car had undersized bearings in it, and the bearings had a date code of 96, which means that This car had some problem which led them to undersize the crankshaft. Now, I can't think of any issue other than low oil pressure leading to some type of damage. So it's just odd that a car that had low oil pressure from almost new and got undersized bearings ends up with low oil pressure. What initiated this repair and what also caused the damage to the crankshaft. Maybe that damage to the crankshaft was there from the original repair when they undersized the crank. Hard to be sure, but we never really 100% determined what was the cause of the low oil pressure. We replaced those oil pump seals and it didn't go away. We replaced the rod bearings and the oil pump at the same time, because when I was inspecting the oil pump, I couldn't find any issue. So it just seemed logical, because we couldn't figure out what the cause of the oil pump of the low oil pressure was. It would be foolish to have to remove that oil pan again. Of course, we ended up doing that. So we just replaced the oil pump just out of an abundance of caution. Let's just, make sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure the car has the correct oil pressure. So it's just interesting that, if this was a original motor that got low oil pressure, okay, but it was a car that had low oil pressure almost from new. And then it ends up having low oil pressure again. It's curious. It makes me wonder if there's something else in this motor, or there's just something going on that's causing that low oil pressure. We'll probably never know. But it's interesting to think, is that damage in the crankshaft, could that have been there from the start and it was just overlooked? How long, when the customer was driving the car, would it make that horrible noise? This car was parked for a while by the original owner. Maybe that's the reason she parked it, is that no one could ever figure out what was causing that noise. We were in there a couple times. We really went above and beyond what most people would do, to be quite frank. So it's interesting. At least now we know if the problem comes back, we know exactly what it is. No mysteries. That's really the most satisfying part for me. And so that's going to conclude our epic saga with this black 940 turbo wagon. Have a good night.